Hello everyone, here's a quick tip for creating a low poly fur effect in Blender. Now, low poly fur is a technique you can use to imitate the sort of effect you can get from a particle hair system, but without all that overhead. You might find this useful if you're exporting your model to a game engine or some other platform that doesn't support particle hair, or if you want to create something like a field of grass that sways back and forth and that follows the hair particle system, but also needs to bend, which does not come with the default particle hair modifier that Blender provides for mesh objects. So if you're ready to get started, let's dive right in. Alright, let's get started. First of all, let's get the geometry that we're going to put the fur on. I'm going to start with just the monkey mesh that comes with Blender, but you can use whatever model you want. And let's add a subdivision surface to give us a little bit more geometry to work with. And let's apply that right away. Next, I'm going to select the faces that we're going to want to apply the fur to. So I'm going to press 3 to go into face select mode. I'm going to press A twice to deselect everything. I'm going to press C to select the faces that we want to eventually have the fur on. So this might take a while, so I'm going to speed up this part of the video. Watch and enjoy. Alright, that looks good. So now that we have these faces selected, let's add them to a vertex group. We can come over to our vertex groups tab and create a new fur group. We can call this fur area. And let's assign those faces we just selected to our vertex group. Now let's get out of edit mode and let's add a smooth to the mesh here, just so those faces aren't as visible. Okay, next thing we're going to do is add a UV, well, we're going to add a texture map to this so that we have a base color underneath the entire thing, so that the gaps, if you see through the gaps in the fur, there's going to be something underneath it. So let's create a shader. I'm going to call this monkey fur, or monkey skin. And we're going to create a image map for that, or texture map for that. Click there. Image texture, and we can create a new one. We can call this monkey fur as well, and the default 1024 by 1024 should work fine. We're not going to need alpha, so let's turn that off and click OK. Alright, now if we go into UV editing, you should see that those vertexes we have selected are showing up there. So let's go into texture paint mode. And we're just going to quickly flood fill the areas that we're interested in. So we're going to click on the vertex area thing there just to mask out the areas that aren't selected. I'm going to select the fill mode, and we're going to pick a reddish color, dark reddish brown for the fur. That'll work, and let's add that to our palette too, because we might need that color again in the future. And we're just going to click on there to flood fill that. I'm going to press Ctrl-I to invert our selection. And let's pick a lighter color for the monkey skin. Sort of an orangish reddish brown. Alright, that should work. And we're going to click again to flood fill one more time. And now we want the eyes. Let's save our color there too. So let's can press A twice to deselect everything. Press L to select the eyeballs there. Now let's use a whitish color. Let's take saturation all the way down and go for bright white there, and we can flood fill those areas too. Now we want the pupils. So let's come back to, where is it? UV editing. And press A twice to deselect everything. And now I'm going to do a C to select the centers of those two eyes. Selected a little bit too much over here, so let's deselect that. Now Control+ to expand our selection. All right, so that is the area where we would like to have the pupils. So let's hop back into texture paint mode and take that color all the way down to black and flood fill that. So, whoops, that looks spooky. Let's go back into layout mode and go into texturing. So there is our basic monkey mesh with a basic skin texture underneath it that's been texture painted. Now you can spend more time rendering out individual strands of fur if you want, which will be useful, but for the purposes of this tutorial that's not necessary, so we're going to move on to the next step. Oh, and before you do that, you're probably going to want to save these. If we go back into texture paint, you can see the image is just in memory right now. You probably want to save that to disk. So you can click save or save as, and that will bring up a window that will allow you to save everything. So I'm going to do that quickly, and I'll be right back with the rest of the tutorial. Now that we've got our base mesh painted, let's add some particle hair. So I'm going to click on the Particles tab here, and then the plus sign. And let's add a fur particles. And now we're going to click on the hair to turn this into a hair emitter. It's a little bit long there. Let's cut that down to about 0.2 meters long. That's looking better. Now we're going to want to restrict that to that face area we selected before. So down here under vertex groups, we're going to go to density fur area. And now the fur is only coming out of that vertex group that we defined before. Now the next thing we're going to want to do is create the low poly fur object that we're going to use to actually model the fur. So I'm going to press Shift A, create a plane, and this will do. Now we're going to create a texture that goes on top of the plane. So let's go down to our Materials tab in New, and let's call this Fur Tuft. And we're going to create an image for it. So under Base Color, we're going to click New Image Texture, then New here, and by default, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller than before. 256 by 256 should be enough resolution for what we're doing. So let's call this Fur Tuft, and we're going to keep the alpha on because we're going to want some transparent areas. And let's turn off the specular lighting. Okay, and let's go into texture paint mode. So, all right, so there we go. Yeah, let's turn off the specular lighting here. Okay, that's already off. So now what we're going to want to do is paint this. Now, by default, we have our mixed brush and some white paint. So if we just paint on there, that's going to show up. We don't want that. We want to, first of all, clear this all out. So let's change that to the Erase Alpha brush and make that a little bit bigger. And we're just going to erase the alpha for this image. Just go over it a few times to make sure you have all of it. Okay, now we're going to switch back to our paint brush, to our mixed brush, and paint in the actual fur. So if you remember from before, we had the monkey fur color palette. So let's just use that same color that we used for the fur. Actually, let's go back to where our fur tuft image is. Come in here, let's make our brush a little bit smaller, and just draw in some fur strands. And you can do something similar. Imagine you have like a field of fur here, and it's going to clump a little bit in a few areas. Maybe we need to make that brush a little bit wider just to speed this up, and so it comes a little bit easier to see the fur. And we're just trying to get in basic fur shape here. And you're going to want to leave some gaps. Now we're going to want more than a single color, and I'm going to change that in just a bit. But this is one of the more artistic decisions you're going to make, how exactly you want the fur to look. Okay, so there is the basic shape with a single color, and there's a little bit of an edge up here. We're going to deal with that later. But the next thing we're going to do is make the bottom a little bit darker. Let's switch to a multiply brush, make that a little bit bigger, and now we can, let's actually reduce the intensity a little bit, bring strength down. Okay, and that's a good way to darken the bottom up there. And now for the top, we're going to use the screen brush, because that's good for adding highlights. Right, and this is just sort of a very basic fur. You can, if you spend more time on it, you can make it look a little bit better. And let's see, I'm going to lighten up the very ends a little bit. I'm going to just go back to my mix brush and make this actually let's press S to sample the color. Make that a lot lighter, and let's take the saturation down and bring that down. So just going to add a little bit of whiteness to the very ends of the fur here. And of course you can use your own image editing software to make maybe a little bit more realistic fur. But this should work. And let's see, maybe we want to go back to the original color for the midsection again. Maybe we can darken up that bottom a little bit more. Actually, I think the bottom needs to be a little bit denser. Let's strength all the way back up again. And you can do something similar if you like doing grass on a grassy field. Or if you're doing some other system that requires a lot of particles like this. Not really sure what other than fur or grass you would use this for, but you might have some good ideas. Alright, and so that and just play around with it until you're happy with how your fur looks. And I'm just pressing the S key to sample here. So if we look over here, you can see that this is working fairly well. We've got sort of like a few strands of hair coming up here, maybe a little thick at the ends. Let's go back to our erase alpha brush. Make that a little bit smaller. Let's just sharpen this up a little bit. There we go. That should be good enough for the tutorial. Okay, and now we've got this little bit of a band up at the top there. We can just do that by erasing the bottom here, because that's more of an error with the UV mapping. Okay, so that should look good. And here we have our basic hair tuft texture that we're going to be putting onto our model. Alright, so let's go back into layout mode. Oh, wait a second, let's save that texture first. Let's Alt S, let's save that. Don't want to lose that in case we crash. And yeah, Blender does not automatically save your textures, so if you do create a texture in texture paint mode, make sure to save it in addition to the regular saving you do for your scene. Alright, now in order to put this low poly texture onto the monkey, we're going to add a modifier to it, particle instance modifier, and then we're going to pick our Suzanne model here. Actually, let's go back into layout mode. And you can see that for every strand of hair on the monkey, we have a copy of our image. This is a little bit too big, so we're going to come back over here and click on size. So now the image, our fur tuft image texture is scaled to the size of Suzanne here. to each individual strand. And we're also going to click Create Along Path so that it follows the path. But I've just realized I forgot one important step. Let's turn off, let's temporarily hide that modifier here. When I created the fur tuft, I didn't include enough geometry. So I'm going to add some loop cuts here so that when this bends along the shaft of the fur, this model will have enough vertices in it to bend as well. Just going to press Ctrl R, and let's give it 4 loop cuts. That should be enough. And let's tab back out there and turn that on again. And now you can see our fur is following that hair shaft. Now, if we actually run this as a particle simulation now, let's go back over here to Suzanne's fur, and let's turn on hair dynamics. And when we run that, you see as the hair droops over here, it also droops on our instance modifier, on our particle instances. And there is some droopy hair all over where the edges of our, where the edge of our monkey is. So following the strands on the actual model here. Now we're going to make a few more changes. First of all, this is a little bit sparse, so let's use the children here, and we're going to go to Interpolated Children on the Suzanne model here. Now in order to pick that up on our particle instance, we're going to click here, and let's see, where's the particle? Okay, so if we check children, then that should be nice and dense now, following the extra children that we've added to our original mesh there. And if we run that simulation again, that gives us a sort of nice dense fur. All right, now the next thing we're going to do is let's fix our shader a little bit. Let's go over to the shading node here. We really should change this a little bit. So if we rendered this out, you can see that we have no alpha showing here. We can fix that by dragging the alpha from fur tuft here down to the alpha shader there. And then we also have to fix that, or really enable alpha, by coming over here to blend mode and clicking alpha clip there for the transparency. And under shadow mode, we're also going to do alpha clip so that the opaque parts of our shader cast shadows, and the transparent areas are truly transparent. So this is looking more like fur now. Okay, and let's see, let's also turn the roughness all the way up to get rid of some of that specular shine we don't want. Even turn the specular down a little bit. Okay, that should work. Now let's go back to layout mode. Now that's good for the shader. Now you probably want your fur on your monkey. Right now we don't have that. We can fix that by coming over here and let's see, under the particle systems, if you open the render section, we are going to, okay, under render section, we have render as path right now. That's the default. We're going to switch that to render as none. So the hair is still there, but it's not being seen anymore. Instead, we're going to be using our particle instance modifier to do that. Now to put the particles on the monkey, we're just going to come over to the transform tab. We're just going to zero that all out so that the monkey and our particles have exactly the same transform. And as you can see now, the fur is on Suzanne here. Now, just like a regular particle system, you can style the hair. So if I click on Suzanne here and I go into particle edit mode, I can comb the hair. So just slick it back like that if you want to. And you can also puff it up. Oh, one more thing I should have done first. Let's go back to object mode here and click on our particle system here. make sure, well, you don't have to do this, but it's a good idea to take this random rotation and put that all the way up, because by default, the hair might not be going the direction you want. By turning that up to random, get more of a clumping effect. It looks more like actual fur. And you have fewer patches where it isn't dense enough. And that just sort of gives a more random all-over effect. Anyhow, back to the particles. Okay, no, make sure the Susanna is selected, because while the fur is a separate object, the particles themselves are being emitted from Suzanne here. So back in particle edit, we can style the hair, we can puff it up, we can cut sections out of it. If you want to trim the beard down here, and do all sorts of other things. So anyhow, that is how you create the particle fur in Blender. Hope you found this useful, and you find it. You can use this to export fur for a video game, because most video game engines don't handle particle hair too well. And it's also good if you might have something in the background that you just want to try an unusual effect with low poly fur, because you like the effect. In any case, hope you like this, and yeah, good luck blendering.